What's up, guys? 3-1 day yesterday. I think I've strung together 3 straight winning days, which is not too bad. 5-2 little mini run there, I think is what I'm on right now. Cleveland Cavaliers winning outright, even though they were losing by 20 in the fourth quarter. Uh, I only needed them to cover the 8, so even down 20. It wasn't looking good, obviously, but it wasn't completely out of the question. But unfortunately for my Celtics, my handicap wound up being right, but I think the Celtics just got totally complacent at the end there, thought the game was over, and Cleveland made a wild comeback and wound up winning the game outright. That's insane, but I will certainly take that. Cincinnati in college probably should have hit on the money line. They were winning in a low-scoring game. They had like a 6-point lead in the final few minutes of the game, lost the entire lead, still had some chances to win in regulation. And at that point, though, you're kind of just hoping that they missed that final free throw. They had a final free throw that they hit that sent it into overtime. I'm pretty sure at that point you're like, no, we don't want overtime here. We don't want any chance that they're going to lose by more than 6 here. Just at that point, give up the money line cash and just take the win on the main ticket there on the spread. But no, of course it does go into overtime, but it was still a pretty low scoring overtime, and the game was just close for all of overtime, so it never got into that dreaded intentional free throw scenario where the game's going to go up to a 7-point margin. That didn't happen. So Cincinnati remained within one possession and lost the game, but covered. So we had that. New Hampshire lost and covered in what was also a low scoring game, but that game was pretty tight the whole way. I think Vermont just didn't really care about it, as my handicap suggested would be the case, although they still won because New Hampshire sucks. And what was the hockey play loss? I'm kind of surprised that the Devils put up as bad a showing as they did, although the game wasn't like totally out of reach. It was a fairly close game, really, even though they were losing by 1 goal for a lot of it. They kept retying it. The game was tied repeatedly. I think even at 3-3, it was tied fairly late into the game. But moving on to today, skipping the NHL card. It's a very small card with 2 big favorites on it, 3 games. Not interested in those games. Don't see an angle. College basketball, we got a pretty big slate. I believe there are no conference tournaments today, which is weird because the last 2 days the Atlantic Sun played, and then yesterday we had some of the other opening rounds. I think in the Patriot League, I don't think there were really any surprises in that one. And then the only good team that was in that opening round of 4 for the Patriot League was Navy. The other 3 teams are just all awful at the bottom of the Patriot League. So Navy won easily, and then I forget who even won the other game, but Holy Cross might have actually won against Army. That's how bad Army is. But expect Navy to get to maybe be the one of those teams that could do anything in that conference whatsoever. Although Colgate certainly is still a huge favorite to win that conference. It's a very, very poor conference outside of Colgate, and even Colgate I think is a little bit down this year, though. And then the Atlantic Sun got really wild last night with the number 1 seed Eastern Kentucky got upset on their home floor. So I had mentioned that they were playing games in Florida in that opening round, but the opening round games, the play-in games or whatever for the 7 through 10 seeds 2 nights ago were actually at each of the top 2 seeds places. So like the half of the bracket that Eastern Kentucky is in, those games were being played on their floor, and then the half of the bracket that Stetson is in, because they're actually the 2 seed in the conference, those games are being played there. So those were the games that were in Florida. The others were at Eastern Kentucky. But then once it got to the round last night, which I believe were the quarterfinals or whatever, then I believe each home team was hosting. So I think Eastern Kentucky hosted, Lipscomb hosted, and they got upset as well. I think they got upset on their own floor. So you saw 2 teams that were 7 or more favorites both go down, the 1 and the 3 seeds, which I believe were the top 2 teams in that conference, really. So they're out of the way now, which is crazy. So now it's like really it is Stetson's conference to lose because they were able to win again last night. And Eastern Kentucky got upset by Jacksonville, which I had said they might have some momentum off of that win in the opening round game, which they did, although Queens was also in that situation and did not do anywhere near as well, and they lost to Stetson, even though I think in both cases, I think the teams that won the play-in, they actually had even a little bit of more of an advantage as far as the momentum was concerned because they were playing on the same court, I think, so they didn't have to go anywhere. But then, of course, there's a huge advantage because the home team actually still has the home court advantage. I'm rambling about the Atlantic Sun, even though nobody cares, and they're not even playing any games tonight. But I just thought it was interesting that both of the top two teams, even though it was the 1 and the 3 seed, the two best teams KenPom ranking-wise in that conference are already out, clearing the way for Stetson, really. Like, I don't think Austin P is very good, and they're the 4. I mean, anything could happen. That could be one of those conferences where every team is so bad, really, that some lower seed could just wind up getting out of there and making the tournament, which is crazy. Won't really matter in the long run. I don't think, even if Lipscomb had won, where I think they're power rated the best in that conference, they still would have been like a 16 seed in the tournament, according to the bracketology that I do. So it's not really going to have an impact on the tournament. It gets worse when you have these teams that are like good enough to be in the tournament, like Indiana State, the Missouri Valley Conference tournament's coming up. It's not going to be that easy for them. And it's, if they like bow out in that tournament and don't make the NCAA tournament, that's going to be one of those situations that sucks, where it's a team that is actually pretty good and can actually compete in some of those like middle seed games in the tournament. That those situations suck when those teams have such a great regular season and they get knocked out of the conference tournament and it's all over. So if it happens to, them or McNeese, or McNeese would probably be one of the worst ones. And then I don't even know who else, but yeah, those teams that could actually do damage, that's what's going to matter more. Those are the situations that really suck. The A-Sun isn't really going to matter much. Like, whoever wins that is probably going to be a 16 seed regardless of who wins it. Could even wind up in one of the play-ins if it's one of the really bad teams in the conference potentially, but I don't know. But we'll see what happens there. It's interesting. It's really Stetson's tournament to lose at this point, because they're going to be hosting any of the remaining games that they play in that tournament. And I believe they are probably the best team left in that tournament. So that's kind of crazy that the two better teams in the conference both got knocked down last night. And then we had opening round games in, I forget what other tournaments started playing. I don't even remember. Actually, Ohio Valley tournament starts tonight. I misspoke. The Ohio Valley actually has 2 opening round games tonight between the bottom of that conference, which nobody's going to pay attention to those games. Oh, and the Northeastern Conference is actually playing tonight as well. Like, those games can be more relevant a little bit, I guess, because like Merrimack is the top seed in that conference that they're actually playing. That's like an 8-team conference, 8-team tournament, I believe, where they all just play from right out of the gate. So Merrimack, I believe, is in like a 2-7 game there. Central Connecticut actually in the 1-8. Somehow they're the 1 seed, even though I think Merrimack is power rated better. So interesting games to keep your eye on, I guess. But I would think that Central Connecticut and Merrimack would both advance out of the first round in that tournament, and then we'll see what happens, because that is probably one of the worst conferences in college basketball. I think maybe the SWAC and the MEAC are worse this year, but that Northeastern Conference, not a good conference. So whoever wins that probably also going to be a 16, and the OVC probably going to be a 16 or 15 seed in the tournament. Moving to the actual games that we have today, there aren't many big games on the slate. You do have Tennessee at South Carolina in college basketball here, where that game is the only game between 2 ranked teams today. I think it's an interesting game. I think I would probably have a slight lean to South Carolina here, but there are some things that I don't like about that. Tennessee's laying 5.5 on the road. They're certainly the better team, but Tennessee's coming off a real statement win on the road at Alabama. They're coming off 2 big wins over Auburn and Alabama, and they have Kentucky up to finish the season. And I think at this point we know that even though South Carolina's second in the SEC standings, they're not as good as any of those 3 other teams. So that almost makes this kind of a sandwich spot, and it's on the road for Tennessee. I think it is South Carolina's home finale, so I think they're going to be up for it, even though they are coming off of a game against Florida. That was a pretty big game that they won. The thing that gives me the most hesitation to want to play South Carolina here, which I'm not going to actually do, but I would lean to the South Carolina side just because Tennessee's coming off such monster wins there and have Kentucky on deck in their home finale. They did already beat Kentucky on the road once, though, and South Carolina is a team that came into their place and beat them. Tennessee, I mean, how many home losses do they have this year? Not many. In the conference, they have 3 losses, and let me see. Were the other 2? Yeah, the other 2 were both on the road at Mississippi State and at Texas A&M. So their only SEC home loss was to the South Carolina team. So that they might draw some motivation just from that aspect of it, so I just can't really quite get involved in it because of that. That in South Carolina is still massively overrated, whereas Tennessee, I think, is rated about where they should be. They are basically like a top 5 team in college basketball, so won't get involved in that. But Tennessee's coming off the more monster win on the road at Alabama. Crazy win, and they had to come back and win that game too. So that is a big game. I mean, a couple of these other games could kind of have tournament implications, and I will be on some of them. And BYU and Iowa State is another one that's with 2 ranked teams. That one's an interesting one too, I guess. BYU, they're coming off a game that I did not expect them to win. They came back and won at home against TCU and still wound up covering, which is just awful and ridiculous because I don't know how TCU blew even the cover in that game, covering as like a big underdog. BYU having to go on the road to Iowa State. They beat Iowa State at home this year, but going on the road to Ames, Iowa is a different situation entirely. And Iowa State might just kind of be laying in wait, although they played on the road in the last game. But it was a game where they were kind of struggling, didn't play well against UCF, and they're actually losing late in the game at UCF, I'm pretty sure, and then wound up winning anyway at UCF. So that was a game that I don't think they were totally focused on. This is going to be their final home game, so I expect Iowa State to show up focused in that one. They're only laying, well, it was 6.5. Now it's 7. It's gone up from 5.5 to 7. I mean, Iowa State is the better team. Ken Baum has had both of these teams kind of underrated all season, although Iowa State is now at the point where they're ranked 6 in the country. So at this point, I think that's gone a little too far. I think they're being overvalued, even though their defense is really good. They do have offensive issues. BYU is kind of the more balanced team a little bit, although their defense is a little bit worse. So Iowa State has the better defense, so they are laying a bunch of points. So not getting involved in those. I'm getting involved in a couple of Big East games, though. One of the games I'll get involved in is going to be Seton Hall. This game's up from pick'em to 1.5. It looks like at some spots, but it looks like the line's all over the place. I think you could still get pick'em at some spots out there on Seton Hall. So playing them just to win the game, I think that looks good. Even though Ken Baum does have Villanova ranked pretty high. And Villanova, if you look at what the odds makers are saying about Villanova, it looks like they're one of the bubble teams that has the best odds to make the tournament right now. So they would have to screw up, I think, kind of badly to not even get into the tournament at this point, at least into one of those first 4 matchups. But I still think this is not the spot for them. I think they could wind up being in a little bit of trouble here because I don't think this game is going to be that easy. And then their final home game is against Creighton, which is not going to be easy, really, even though your final home game, you do tend to get pumped up for it and play pretty well. Villanova is kind of an undervalued team. They're just flying under the radar because their record sucks, but they've had a pretty brutal schedule. And they're ranked 24th in Ken Baum's rankings, although Seton Hall is all the way down at 60. But I think that somehow equates to Villanova only being like a 1-point favorite or so in this game. So I like the spot. If you're getting Seton Hall right around a pick 'em just because of the spot, I think that's still good if it's only like 1 point off from where the power ratings guys have it. I don't like the spot. Villanova, I think they're maybe feeling a little bit comfortable after they've made a nice run here, even though, yes, both of these teams are going to want to win this game. I mean, both of these teams are on the bubble here right now, so they're both going to be motivated as far as the bubble aspect of it is concerned. They're both fighting to get into the tournament. And of course, the Big East tournament is going to have implications on this too, what these teams do in the Big East tournament. I think Villanova is probably the team out of these two that might have the better shot to do something, to make some more noise in the Big East tournament, just because they're power rated way higher than Seton Hall. But in this game, I like Seton Hall. Villanova, I mean, it looks like the line is kind of moving in the direction of Seton Hall. Villanova is coming off another nice win. They've caught kind of fire here and won 5 of their last 6 games, but they beat Georgetown twice in that span, beating Butler at home. I mean, it's a game that they're supposed to win, and they did, and beating Seton Hall at home is a game they're supposed to win as well. And then in their most recent game, they won at Providence, so that was actually kind of surprising. That was a game that had tournament implications. That was a big win as far as Villanova, their tournament hopes, and really a huge loss for Providence. So that was a big win for Villanova. Now they're playing a second straight road game, and they're playing a Seton Hall team that they beat in Villanova 80-54 earlier this year, a 26-point loss. I mean, I don't care if Villanova is good. They are better than the record indicates. So that's an embarrassing loss, dude. If you're Seton Hall is actually above them in the standings, which is kind of crazy, which gives me a little hesitation here, but I still like the spot because Villanova's in a second straight road game, coming off a big game, and they have a big game up next against Creighton, which is going to be their final home game And they actually did beat Creighton on the road earlier this season, which is crazy. But it's still, they're going to be looking ahead to Creighton potentially because that's a big game. Seton Hall, they already crushed at home. Like I said, they embarrassed them by 26. So Villanova might be in a spot where they might be a little bit complacent off of a win that had some pretty big tournament implications. They might be feeling a little bit comfortable right now, let's say. And if you go to Seton Hall, who's going to, I think, be in a pissed mood because of what happened to them the other time they faced this Villanova team. And now Seton Hall catches them at Seton Hall, and it's going to be senior night. It's going to be Seton Hall's home finale. Yeah, I think Seton Hall, they're in a much better spot here, a spot where they're poised to play a pretty good game here. As Villanova, I think, might even be looking like forward a little bit to that Creighton game into the Big East tournament and what they're going to do there after that big win over Providence. Seton Hall, on the other hand, yeah, not only did they get embarrassed by Villanova, but they just lost 2 games in a row, but they lost to Creighton and UConn both on the road. So can you really blame them for losing both of those games? And the UConn game was actually revenge because they actually beat UConn at Seton Hall early this year. So Seton Hall has been better at home for sure. They've beaten UConn and Marquette at home. They did not beat Creighton at home though, but they've beaten some of the better teams in the Big East at home, and they are going to be at home in this one. But now they're coming off those 2 road losses. And now, actually, this is not their home finale. Excuse me. They do have DePaul as their home finale next, but are they really going to care that much about DePaul? Probably not. This game is bigger. I think they're going to be focused on Villanova, the team that totally embarrassed them the other time they played them this year. And they're also coming off of a pretty embarrassing loss to UConn, even though it is UConn, one of the best teams in the country. They still lost that game by 30 points. If you lose by 30, it's a game that people are kind of thinking might be competitive, although I wasn't sure that that was going to be the case because UConn was a big double-digit favorite. Seton Hall got absolutely destroyed in that game. I don't think it was ever close, so that's kind of embarrassing. So I think they're going to be in a bounce-back mode, finally back home with their home crowd there in a pretty big game against Villanova, revenge game. I like Seton Hall in that one, so that's what I'm going to do there. Going into the Atlantic 10, so these are also regular season games here, playing out the stretch here. I think Loyola Chicago is in a letdown spot, and I will be going against Loyola Chicago, which is a play on Davidson. Loyola Chicago is actually a pretty overrated team at this point. It looks like this line's gone down from Davidson -1 to a pick'em. So that's kind of interesting. You can get Davidson out there to pick them right now. So you're just picking them to win the game as well. Looks like there are 1.5s out there as well. The line's kind of all over the place again on this one. But KenPom has Loyola Chicago ranked pretty high. Oh, and by the way, I should say Villanova, they play an extremely slow pace as well. I forgot to mention that. So Seton Hall, even though they're a pretty balanced team, they play a little bit faster. They don't play that much faster than Villanova. Villanova plays a ridiculously slow pace. It might even be too slow for Seton Hall's liking there. So we'll see about that. Villanova's in like the slowest 15 teams in the country, and Seton Hall's just in the bottom 2/3. I don't know if that's going to matter that much. Oh, Seton Hall is actually what am I talking about? I'm playing Seton Hall here. So yeah, Seton Hall plays a little bit of a faster pace. So I don't know if there's going to be that much of a pacing collision there, but Seton Hall. And both of these teams are, I think, better defensively than offensively, too. But Seton Hall plays a little bit of a faster pace. They might be able to speed up that game a little bit. Excuse me. They're the home team, the team that I'm on. Holy crap, I'm misspeaking. I'm totally out of it. But yeah, Seton Hall is that first play. That's not the game that there was one game I was looking at that has a big pacing collision. And I think it's actually these other 2 games. This one is Loyola Chicago. KenPom has them as one of the luckier teams in the country right now, 35th in luck. So he's basically telling you that their record is a little bit better than what it should be. It makes them look a little bit better than what they should be. And Loyola, he has them ranked down at 96 in the country. They're playing Davidson. He has Davidson not that much further. He has Davidson only 8 ranking spots lower than that. He has both of these teams also better defensively than offensively. They're both better defensive teams. So this is one of the games with a huge pacing collision where Loyola plays at 93rd in tempo according to KenPom, whereas Davidson is at 294th. So Loyola's in like the top 3rd and Davidson's in like the bottom 3rd tempo-wise. So Davidson might be able to ugly up this game a little bit and do something here against Loyola. So Loyola might be thrust into a pace that they don't totally like because they like to ramble. They like to run a little bit more than Davidson does. So Davidson might be able to slow down this game. But the primary reason why I'm going against Loyola here is they just beat Dayton. Dayton's still like the class of the A10. They're still the only team in the A10, I think, that's been ranked this season. I don't know if Richmond has broken into the rankings at all, even though they're atop the conference right now. I still think Dayton is the best team in the conference power ratings wise. The conference isn't that good. Like I think Dayton, KenPom has in like the 30 range, 30 nationally. So not that great. Dayton, I think, is still ranked in the top 25 in the rankings, though, and that's a big win for Loyola, man. They just beat Dayton, and they do have their home finale up next, although it's against LaSalle, who's not a very good team, but still, I think Dayton might be in a little bit of a letdown spot here, and they already beat Davidson by double digits, by 13 at Loyola. Loyola's been winning a ton of games. They've been one of the hottest teams in the country before losing to St. Bonaventure, before they beat Dayton. They might have been looking ahead to Dayton. That was kind of a sandwich spot, really, because they had crushed George Mason the game before that, too. So I don't think they were in the best spot going to St. Bonaventure there, and they lost that one. But other than that, they had won 7 in a row prior to that. They'd won 10 of 11 prior to that, and now they've still won 11 of the last 13 games or something like that. So they're still one of the hotter teams in the country, which if the public is looking at this game, there's no way they're going to want to play Davidson, the team with the way, way uglier record. But looking at KenPom's ratings, Davidson is really not that much worse. They're almost as good as Loyola, according to him. He just has Loyola as being the much, much luckier team. Davidson, I believe he has Davidson winning this game. So he has them power rated as if they should be the favorite here. So I will go with Davidson. It's a little bit of revenge because they and Loyola might be a little bit complacent because Loyola is coming off a much bigger game, a win over Dayton, the class of the conference. Davidson, on the other hand, just lost to Dayton by double digits on the road, though, at Dayton. So Davidson's lost 3 in a row, but they were to Richmond, Dayton, and UMass, and those are 3 of the top 5 teams in the conference, really, at least record-wise. So those games were not easy, and 2 of them were on the road. So I don't know if you can blame them for really any of those losses necessarily. And now this is Davidson's senior day, man. This is their final home game. They have a Loyola Chicago team that already beat them once. Coming into their house, Loyola might be in a position where they might be feeling a little bit comfortable and maybe overlook them a little bit. You might say, but they're playing for seeding in the A-10. Yeah, that's true, but Loyola's not going to fall out of one of the top 4 seeds or top 3 seeds, really, at the very least. So I forget how this tournament gets structured, but they're at least going to like have buys, I think, into the quarterfinals or something like that. So seeding isn't really a huge deal in this tournament. It's not really going to matter that much. It's at a neutral site. I'm pretty sure the A-10, they play at a neutral location, so there's no home court to be won there. So Loyola's coming off one of their biggest wins of the season over ranked Dayton, who is obviously one of the top teams in the conference. And now they're playing one of the lower teams in the conference, but the records are misleading here. Like I said, these teams, there's not that much that separate these teams power ratings wise. And those Davidson losses recently were pretty much all to pretty good teams. So actually, yeah, all their losses going all the way back to that first loss to Richmond. They lost to Richmond, VCU, Loyola, Bonaventure, Richmond, Dayton, and UMass. So all those recent conference losses were all to the top, like 6 or 7 teams in the conference. So no shame in really any of those losses. So Davidson might be not quite as bad as the record might make it look. So we're going to play Davidson here. I think Loyola's in the letdown spot as well. And then the final game I'm going to be on is going to be to fade UConn. I did it when they faced Creighton, and I'm doing it again here, man. Even though UConn obviously is one of the top teams in the country, they're power rated as one of the top teams in the country. Marquette is rated not that much worse. Oh, this is, of course, one of the other games that is between 2 ranked teams. And Marquette, if anything, they're actually a little bit overranked, being ranked at 8 here, where KenPom, I think, has them around 14th. And he does have UConn second, which is also where they're ranked in the national rankings. He has them as the second power-rated team as well. But even so, even though Marquette might be a little bit overranked, and people might like look at this and think, well, maybe this will be a competitive game. Public, will they want to take the points with Marquette here? I'm not sure, because looking at what has happened between these, what has happened involving these 2 teams recently, I don't think the public is going to want to fade UConn here, man. They're all over UConn when they played at Creighton a few games ago, and Creighton absolutely blasted them. This is going to be a game that's a much, much better situation for Marquette, man. I'm not sure UConn has that much to play for. They have the Big East completely wrapped up. So since they beat Seton Hall on their home floor in their previous game, I believe they clinched the 1 seed. They clinched the regular season title. So they could be in a little bit of a letdown just because of that. That was a big game. That was at home, and it was revenge against Seton Hall because Seton Hall had beaten them already. So they're coming off a big win. Revenge, that's kind of a statement game, and they crushed them, man. They beat them by 30. That is a statement. Nobody's going to want to jump in front of UConn despite that loss to Creighton. Like, people looking at their recent games they haven't lost besides that since the Seton Hall game all the way back, which was in like the conference opener or whatever. So they've only lost 2 games in conference this year. Nobody's going to want to step in front of UConn here, but I think this is the spot. This is a spot to do it besides that Creighton one, which I was also on because that was also UConn had made a statement beating Marquette the game before that, where people thought that might be competitive, and they annihilated Marquette by almost 30 points. Now they're coming off another 30-point win, also at home, and now having to go out on the road. Their home games are now over, and they have to go to Marquette. And Marquette is, as I said, that team that they already beat by about 30. So UConn might be pretty complacent here, man, because they've already wrapped up the Big East. They might already be looking forward to the Big East tournament at this point. There's basically no way they're going to lose their 1 seed status in the NCAA tournament at this point. Something really crazy would have to happen for them to drop out of the 1 seed. Like, they could lose even 2 games probably and still be a 1 seed, depending on who they lose to. Like, losing to Marquette is not really even going to hurt them that much. So I think this game means a lot more to Marquette. It's Marquette's senior night, I believe. So this is going to be a huge game for Marquette because it's revenge for just getting absolutely annihilated by UConn. But Marquette's also coming off another loss. They haven't lost many games in conference either. They've been on a pretty nice run as well, but they just lost to Creighton by 14. This is now going to be their final home game. They're kind of in a bounce back spot here. I believe Creighton is the team they'd already beaten at home. Yeah, so Creighton got a little bit of revenge against them. That maybe was a little bit of a bigger game for Creighton. I like to do all these like zigzag things, man, looking at teams that played really well in their prior game and go against them, against teams that didn't play quite as well in their previous game and or played really poorly and jump on them. That's kind of what I like to do. So this kind of lines up for all of those situations. It's got the revenge situation. It's got UConn really not having that much that I think will be a motivating factor in this game because they just wrapped up the Big East. They celebrated the Big East regular season title. They're not going to drop out of the 1 seed, so there's not that much for them to play for here. So I'm going to take Marquette plus the points here, which they're getting a decent helping of points at home. And KenPom has these teams rated pretty close. So he did have UConn, I believe, is like a pretty big favorite against them at home. What were they? They were a 7-point favorite at home or something. So that kind of equates to UConn probably should be like a 1-point favorite on the road here, or maybe Marquette should even well, I don't know. Maybe it should be like closer to a pick'em here, but you look at this line, and because of the recent play and whatever, because of what UConn did to them in their previous game, you're looking at this line. Let me see. Where do we got this line here? UConn. Connecticut. Where is it? Yeah, you have UConn favored by 5. They're up from 4 to 5, so I think they were favored by 7 against Marquette at home, and now they're laying, like, getting close to the same amount on the road. I think the lines moved too much, man. That game wasn't very long ago, and, like, what's changed since then? Not much, other than you've watched these teams play for a few more games. It's recency bias factoring in for sure. And KenPom, even though I think he had UConn a little bit underrated in that first matchup, which is why I said I liked UConn to win that one, I think he's telling you that now UConn's a little bit overrated in the market coming into this game. And I think he probably has this line at around 2 or 3, not 5. So I think that based on what the line was in the previous game, the line should even be closer to a pick'em here. So almost pick the winner. So we're going to grab the generous helping of points with Marquette. I think you can get it at 5.5 right now is what you can see out there. I don't know if it's going to go up even further with the public getting involved there, but there you go with that one. And then go into the NBA real quick to wrap up the video. NBA, we're going to be on one game. There are other spots where, like Golden State, they got so completely embarrassed by the Celtics in the last game. You would have to think that they would be the lead in this game, whereas the Milwaukee Bucks are coming off a nice win against the LA Clippers. I believe the Clippers are in a really bad spot going into the Bucks' house. The Clippers had just beaten Minnesota, I think, in the game before that, in a really close game right at the end with a huge comeback. So they were in a bad spot, went into the Bucks. The Bucks actually beat them without Giannis, though. So that's kind of the reason why I don't like the Bucks as much here, because if Giannis is going to play, I don't know if he's going to play. I don't know if the game is lined like he's going to play or not. But if he comes back, it's going to be like a reverse injured player theory spot again. And Milwaukee's coming off. They are coming off a pretty big game, but if it's a reverse injured player theory spot, then I don't like it as much. So even though Milwaukee is coming off a big win, Golden State is coming off an embarrassing game against the Celtics, like a game they're going to want to bounce back from. But they're also returning home from a road trip to the East Coast with like 1 day off. So that's not, or 2 days off, I guess. So that's not good either. So I don't like those road trip return spots either. So I'm not going to get involved in this game. Even though the lean would be to Golden State, despite them returning home from a road trip, they're like the embarrassed team, and the Bucks are coming off that bad loss. But if Giannis is the Bucks are coming off that big win. But if this is like a reverse injured player theory spot, plus it's a return home for the Warriors and reverse injured player with Giannis coming back on the Bucks, too many factors that are opposing each other here. So I just don't want to actually play this game in any capacity. Then you also got Kings Lakers. The Lakers have got to be in a bit of a letdown spot here, I would think, right? Because they just beat Sacramento, or excuse me, they're playing Sacramento tonight. They played pretty tough against the Nuggets at home. Then they beat the Oklahoma City Thunder at home, and they do have the Bucks and the T-Wolves up next. They're playing the Kings here, although I think the Kings are 2-0 against them this year. So, or are the Lakers 2-0 against them? Let me see. I forget who won those games. Yeah, no, Sacramento, I think, is 2-0 against the Lakers this year. So the Lakers might be still a little bit motivated here. It's a decent team coming into their house. So I don't know if the Lakers are going to totally suffer a letdown here. That was a big win over OKC. But if they were facing a lesser opponent, I might say, yeah, they're going to be in a letdown spot. But I don't know. The Kings are in more of a bounce back spot, though, because they just returned home. And as I said, they were in a weird, like, bad sandwich spot. But the Kings were way ahead. I didn't even realize how far they were ahead in that game. I said the game was kind of hovering around the number at the end, but the Kings were actually way ahead in that game. They were up 20 in like the third quarter or something, and they blew the whole thing, and Chicago came back and not only covered but won. So yay for me, I guess, with the Chicago win there. But I think Chicago was in the right spot to play them there, at least, or the Kings were in a spot to play against them. So the Kings, that was a bad game for them. So I think they're going to want to be in a bounce back mode. So I would still lean to the Kings plus the points here in this game against the Lakers, but there are some factors that would point me in the other direction slightly, just because I think because the Lakers have not beaten the Kings yet and because they're good, I think they still might be focused on them a little bit. But the game that I'm going to be on, you know what I'm doing, man. I went with the Cleveland Cavs last night against the Celtics in what I thought was just a real big letdown spot for the Celtics off a monumental win. Now I'm going to fade the Cavs. They're playing again on a back-to-back. This line's already moved up from the Hawks as a 1-point underdog to a 2.5-point favorite. I don't know when it was a 1.5-point dog, to be honest. I don't know if this is still factoring in the Mitchell injury, because he is definitely not going to be back for the Cavs. So the Cavs are playing with kind of a thin roster. I think Strus didn't play last night of the game against the Celtics either. The Cavs still won with like some backups in there and stuff. So that's kind of crazy. But Strus might be back in this game. I don't know if that's really going to change the line very much, though. The Mitchell injury is the thing that really changes the line a little bit, but Atlanta's been playing a little bit better as well. Atlanta, they're going to be without Trae Young still, I believe, as well. I don't know when he's coming back. So we have key injuries on both sides. The Hawks are returning from a road trip, which I don't love, but they at least have a day off. And, they played last night too, and they're returning from a road trip. Never mind. So both of these teams are on back-to-backs. So this is kind of a weird spot for both teams. So that kind of, I don't know. But the fact that Cleveland's on a back-to-back and they had such a ridiculous comeback and win last night, I don't know what they're going to have left in the tank here for this game against the Hawks. And the Hawks are a team with a losing record. I think Cleveland might still overlook the Hawks in a spot like this. The Hawks are returning home from a road trip, but it was only a road trip up to New York. So they played 3 games all in Brooklyn and in Manhattan, and then they're coming back home from that. So not really a huge road trip. So I think that kind of mitigates the road trip return distraction spot a little bit. Plus, when it's Cleveland coming into your house and you don't have a bigger game up next, I think you're still going to show some focus against Cleveland. Atlanta played a good game last night, though, and they did beat the Knicks in New York by double digits. The Knicks have really kind of been struggling recently, falling apart, and I don't think Brunson played in that game. So I don't know if there's that much to take away from that game there. Let me see. Did Brunson play in that game? I don't believe he did. So the Knicks are just kind of, they did not. Or excuse me, he did not. So the Knicks are just kind of like, they're really not in a great situation right now up in New York there. But I don't think Atlanta's going to be like feeling high on themselves after beating the Knicks team that's been struggling and without their best player. So coming back home, I think they are going to be focused on a Cleveland team that, even though they're without Mitchell, they have a good record. They've been playing good basketball, and they just beat the Celtics. This is a sandwich spot for Cleveland, man. So both of these teams are in back-to-backs, but Cleveland, you got to go against them. Cleveland, I mean, they even though Cleveland did just lose to the Knicks. So people, I don't know if the public's going to do any syllogistic thing here. I don't think they will, because they're going to look at the records. They know Cleveland's the better team here, which they're still being lined as the better team, but not by much with Mitchell out. But Cleveland's just coming off such a monumental win, and with a thin roster that they have going on right now without Mitchell, I don't know if they're going to be able to turn around right away. And they have both these teams are having to travel now. Cleveland's having to go out on the road to Atlanta now. So both these teams are actually coming from the Northeast down to Atlanta with no time off. So that kind of negates the whole like travel aspect of it and return home aspect of it. So I think that's just, you can kind of just throw that out a little bit. But this has got to be like a huge letdown and sandwich spot for Cleveland, because they're just coming off such a max effort to make that such a huge comeback against the Celtics, the best team in the league, after what the Celtics just did to the Warriors. That was a huge win for Cleveland, and Cleveland had lost to them twice this year, I think, as I mentioned. So Cleveland was able to get a little bit of in-season revenge as well, if that matters. So that's a huge win for Cleveland. Now they're going to Atlanta. Yeah, all right. Atlanta, I don't know if they're going to pay much attention to them. They've beaten Atlanta twice this year already, although that was at home. I think those are the only two times they played Atlanta this year. They beat them both times. Actually, no, they're 3-0 against Atlanta, and they beat them once in Atlanta already too, and beat them by 19 points or something, 19 or 21 points, whatever it was. So Cleveland's 3-0 against this Atlanta team, so they might kind of just overlook this Atlanta team, given who the opponent is, and in a spot like this, I don't know if they're going to pay much attention to them. I mean, they got Minnesota up next in 2 days, an ESPN Friday game. That's a big game, national TV game against the Minnesota T-Wolves, one of the better teams in basketball, one of the best teams in basketball. I don't like it at all. The market's moved a little bit from the Hawks, up from a 1-point dog, although I don't know when they were a 1-point dog, up to a 2.5-point favorite. I don't know what the best number you can get here is, but I think it might be even moving further. It looks like up more towards the Hawks. So Hawks 2.5, or maybe taking the Hawks money line at like minus 130 something, maybe why you can still grab it there if you want to take them to just win the game. I'm going to play the Hawks. Probably lay the 2.5, I guess, because it's still kind of in that range where you kind of just ask them to win the game, although you're asking them to win by more than one bucket. But yeah, but it looks like we do have the Cavs with 54% of the cash, but 55% of tickets on the other side on the Hawks. So I don't like that, where the cash discrepancy looks like it's on the Cavs, and the Hawks look like they have the majority of tickets right now. Kind of doubt that's going to wind up being the case, because who's going to play on the Atlanta Hawks, a team with a losing record without their star player, even though Cleveland is without their best player? Cleveland's got the way better record. They're the better team. So I think the public, and they just beat the Celtics, and people saw that. So I think people, if the public is getting involved in this game, I don't think they're going to be on the Hawks side. So those are my games today, man. We got 4 basketball games. I want to keep this run going, but we got 2 games in the Big East, 3 college basketball games, and 1 NBA game. And we're on Seton Hall, pick 'em just to win the game. Davidson, pick 'em just to win the game. Marquette plus 5.5 at home, and Atlanta Hawks minus 2.5. Let's get it done. Let's keep this run going. Peace.